Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining me with another great expert interview today. We are going to talk about how to make sure that our parents' taxes are filed correctly and are also filed, period. I think that especially during coronavirus, taxes are the last thing that we're thinking about right now. And it's probably the same with our parents because we are really overwhelmed with the pain and the fear and all of that stuff going on. So that's why I felt it was really helpful to bring in a tax accountant expert to talk with us about what to keep in mind for this year and future years. And before I get into that, I will introduce myself. So my name is Laura Smothers-Chu, and I am the CEO and founder of Befriended Heart, where I help long distance daughters navigate their parents' dementia. So I am super excited today to introduce my friend, Teresa Walker. Teresa and I actually met at the Certified Senior Advisor Conference last year, and I just heard about her personal experience with dementia and what she was doing professionally, and I felt like I really wanted you guys to meet her. So Teresa is a director at Bland Garvey Accountants and Consultants in Richardson, Texas, which is right around the Dallas area. Teresa has 25 years of experience assisting families in tax consulting, elder services, and healthcare. And at Bland Garvey specifically, Teresa provides tax, accounting, and consulting services for elders and their families to help them have peace of mind. And peace of mind is huge. It's definitely what we need right now. And I think it's what your parents need as well. Teresa, welcome to Joy in Dementia. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me, Laura. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your expertise in addition to what I mentioned in the intro?
Sure. As you mentioned, I am a CPA, certified public accountant here in Texas, and I work for a public accounting firm, and so we do taxes and accounting and financial services for the public. I'm also a certified senior advisor, which is a designation that you and I both share, and I've had that since around 2012. And so I have that designation, and those two together, partner together here at Bland Garvey to help my clients.
Awesome, awesome. Can you talk just a little bit about how a CPA is different from a financial advisor? I think we daughters get a little bit confused as to which one do we talk to when.
Sure. Well, a certified public accountant is a licensed designation, so that means we have gone through the CPA exam and we are licensed to prepare tax returns and financial statements. Financial advisor, they have their own designations, obviously, certified financial planner, but they are more in the avenue of wealth advisory, advising clients on investments and retirement planning and things of that nature, more so than the tax. I mean, we work hand in hand with certified financial planners.
Thank you for clearing that up. I feel like when dementia is involved, there's just so many people you need on your professional team because we daughters can't do it alone. And it's also not really in our area of expertise. Do you have any personal experience with dementia?
I do, and actually that's what led me to the CSA designation. I am an only daughter, and I had two parents that had dementia in various forms, and they were living together. It was interesting in that one was strong in one area and one was weak in another. So between the two, they kind of made one good person. And that worked for quite a while. And I was just involved, and I lived close by and providing oversight when they needed it. But then, as the result of an injury that my mother sustained, she ended up in skilled nursing, and my father wasn't far behind because he did not do well on his own. And with them both having dementia, they just did not need to be alone. So they lived together in skilled nursing for a few years, and then my mother passed away. And then my father went on to live in memory care for another 6 years until he passed away a few years ago. And so I continued, even though I was not their 24-hour on site caregiver. I at times felt like I was, because I was always keeping my finger on the pulse of what was going on with their care and the communities, and that sometimes involves relocation or making sure that the doctor is providing the right care and nurses providing the right care. So, and when you've got dementia, as your audience well knows, they can't advocate for themselves. So I had to make sure that they were getting their needs met. While even though they were in the community, you still have to be involved.
Yeah, definitely. I think we as daughters all are aware of how much we need to be present for our parents, even when they are in skilled nursing or memory care, especially because our healthcare system just really isn't designed for people with dementia, unfortunately. And so we sort of have to pick up the slack on that. And that's why it's so important that you encourage your parents to hire helpers like Teresa, like a certified financial advisor, like someone who can advocate for your parents at a doctor's office if you are located long distance. And Teresa, I just wanted to ask, like, how far away were you from the skilled nursing facility or the memory care?
I was blessed in that I was not all that far. At different times, it would be a 5 to 10 mile trip from where I live.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think too, something important that I haven't mentioned a lot on this channel is some people think like, oh, am I a long distance daughter? I don't know. I really don't define that as a certain number of miles or anything. It's really an emotional feeling. So if you feel like you're far away from your parents, then I consider you long distance. So thank you for sharing your personal story, Teresa. And how did you feel like this personal experience helped shape your career?
Well, when my parents were still at home, I slowly became involved in bill paying, because that was a skill that faded away. My mother had been an executive secretary all her life. She had always taken care of the bills. My dad had no idea about any of that. And then when she began to not be able to take care of that, then I stepped in and helped make sure bills got paid, and things around the house were taken care of. And I thought to myself, I can't be the only one that's helping my parents with their bill paying. Is there a way I can blend what I do for a profession with what I feel strongly about in my heart, helping seniors? So I sought out an avenue to blend what I do with what I love, and I found the Certified Senior Advisor designation. And so that led me to a path and a niche of working with seniors to help them make sure their business affairs are taken care of, and help families make sure their parents have taken care of taxes and things like that. And I have served as a trustee for long distance daughters. And so that niche has just really been born out of what I did with my parents.
I love that. I remember hearing that story at the CSA conference, so I knew that I needed to meet you because we are both only children. And honestly, I can't imagine it was already hard enough to help one parent who had dementia, let alone, both parents. So the fact that you, I mean, there was no one else in your family, right? So like you had to step up and help them with financial bill pay at first, and then probably moved over to taxes. I think you mentioned too in one of our previous conversations that one of the first steps that you took to sort of have your finger on the pulse of what was going on with your parents was to have access to their bank account online. And I think now it's a lot easier to get that online access. Can you tell us, I know that you mentioned to me a little tidbit about sort of the first sign that you noticed there was something going on with your mom. I'd love for you to
Yes,
share that with us.
yes. I'm very lucky in that my parents had no problems with me having access to their bank information. So I didn't have that struggle, at least. So I would periodically log into their checking account just to make sure that there wasn't any random transactions that didn't need to be taking place, or drafts or checks that were written inappropriately. And so one day I did see that my mother had written a check, and it was written in Spanish. So my mother did not speak or read or write Spanish. So I was curious about that. So I had a good friend at church who did speak Spanish, and I asked her if she would look at this check for me and tell me what it meant. And I don't remember now who it was written to, but it was something that was okay, like maybe the water department or the county tax office or something like that. But she had literally looked at the bill and evidently looked at the Spanish side of the bill and just copied the words off the bill to write the check. So while, she got the bill paid, that was a big red flag to me that she didn't exactly know what she was doing. She was just going through the motions and did not realize that she had literally written a check in Spanish.
Right. And luckily it went to the right place, and
Right.
hopefully the water company didn't call and say, this is kind of strange. But
Right.
yeah, I mean, I think that's underscores how important it is if we can get that online bank account access. And I think especially now, Teresa, I'm sure you've had this experience too, or like you've noticed some weird, $2 expenses coming up in
Yes.
your checking account and it wasn't you.
Right.
So if you're having a little bit of challenges talking to your parents about giving you permission to check in on their online banking,
Mhm.
you could say, hey mom, I experienced this $2 charge this month. I don't know what's going on. I don't want that to happen to you guys. So
Mhm.
I can definitely help you make sure that you're not getting that experience too.
Right. And there are ways you can talk with the bank about what level of access you have, if that's a concern, to where you just have the ability to log in and look, but not make transactions. So I know some parents are nervous about other people having access to, and honestly, some are nervous about their daughters having access to their bank account. And that's not necessarily a bad idea to be nervous about that. So I think you can talk with the bank and make sure you have the type of access that everybody's comfortable with.
Definitely. Definitely. So let's get into some tax specific recommendations.
Okay.
And, I think there's a lot of possible issues that can happen, Teresa. And I think you know this through talking with your daughter clients. But I've heard a lot of challenges when it comes to this. So Teresa and I are going to try to navigate you through this with some major recommendations. So Teresa, what would you say is the first step that long distance daughters can take to ensure that things are happening the way they need to?
Well, in regards to tax filings, I think it's real important to check with your parents and see if their taxes are continuing to be filed. Because as parents lose their ability to take care of day-to-day business, that's an easy task that can fall along the wayside, is making sure taxes get paid. You can obviously ask them, but it wouldn't hurt to say, "Can you show me your tax return?" or "Do you need help this year getting your taxes filed?" There's various ways to find out that that's getting taken care of.
Yes, yes. And I know that the fact that my dad was having a hard time filing his taxes, we would catch up once or a couple times a week. And because I, of course, was living long distance, and he mentioned that, he said, this is really weird that the taxes are taking me like a whole weekend to complete. And that's never happened before. And I asked him, okay, well, has there been any additional expenses or credits or things that you're needing to include? And he said, no, everything's the same. I don't know why it's been so difficult for me to do these. And so I think that is really important to ask. I know, Teresa, you mentioned that in your personal experience where your parents were sort of just compensating for each other, that may be an example of where the parents might say, oh, yeah, everything's fine, right?
Right.
So let's say that our daughters know that probably the forgetful parent is more progressed in the stages, and perhaps maybe the caregiving parent isn't ready to approach that, or the caregiving parent has no experience doing taxes, kind of like your parents, where your
Mhm.
mom was the tax person. And in my family, my dad was the tax person.
Mhm.
And then the other person had no idea how to do things and just assumed everything was hunky dory. What's something that daughters can do to double check that everything is okay, that things have been filed on time?
Well, depending on logistics, if they are expressing comments like you described that that are raising a red flag that maybe this isn't getting done, then if you have the ability to visit them and see what documentation may be laying around. Also, if you find that you feel like it hasn't been taken care of, you can get on the phone with your parent, call the IRS and find out where they are with their filings. And then the next step after that is if you feel like they haven't filed and you don't know where the information is or are concerned that you don't have all the information, you can get a power of attorney that's specific to the IRS and get that on file and request the documents, or I would recommend getting a tax preparer involved to help you with that power of attorney, because we have avenues to get information that are much more streamlined than in the public avenue.
Yeah, and so can you tell me, Teresa, is the IRS power of attorney the same as if you're like the designated power of attorney for financial issues?
No, actually, the IRS has its own power of attorney form. It's Form 2848. And a parent can sign that and give a daughter power of attorney to contact the IRS on their behalf. They can give that power of attorney to a tax preparer to give them that access as well. So it's a special form all by itself that's the only one the IRS recognizes.
Interesting. I feel like it's so difficult for us as families with dementia to, to get these things done. It can be frustrating at times. What about if my mom is already the financial power of attorney for my dad? It'd probably be easier for her to call the IRS then, right?
Absolutely, yes. For a married couple, she can easily call the IRS and get that information.
Okay, that's super helpful. So if for some reason for our viewers, your parents aren't comfortable with that, you could also let your caregiving parent know, hey mom, you might want to just check, or hey dad, you might want to just check that the taxes are being filed, because there can be a pretty large penalty if they're not. And I don't want to add that stress to your life. We can just double check.
Right.
So what happens if we as daughters can't find the documents? Talked about Form 2848.
And what that allows me to do is actually download a transcript for each year of all the documents that are on file with the IRS pertaining to their tax return, which I could then use to prepare their tax return. So that's a really great tool. I mean, there's a little time involved in getting a power of attorney and getting it on file and getting that access. But once you have it, it's just an easy download of information that I can then use to prepare the tax return. You might find an interest statement or a 1099 laying around, but you don't know if that's everything. So
Right.
This way you ensure that you capture all the documents that are necessary.
Oh my gosh, that's so important, because I know I've talked with daughters that their parent had a property in a different state, or all these things that you have no idea as a daughter, or there was an account, a random account that we didn't even know that my dad had opened. And I mean, granted, it was great because we got some extra money unexpectedly, but we needed to make sure that we were, as a family, were being truthful to the government. So I think that's really important to remember. And what do you think is the best way for daughters and families to get that designated power of attorney? Is there a different professional that we need to work with before we work with a tax preparer?
Yes, an elder law attorney is a critical player in this scenario. Before it's too late to get your parents to do these necessary documents, they need to be competent to prepare powers of attorney. And if there's significant assets involved, estate planning that might involve a trust, those things need to be in place while they're still competent. And so I know personally, I was very thankful that I had my parents revise their wills and powers of attorney a few years before they really declined and would not have been competent to sign those documents. I was so thankful that I had that done in advance. Having the durable power of attorney where the daughter has financial power of attorney then allows that daughter to speak to the tax preparer, speak to the IRS do the power of attorney on behalf of the parents. It's very critical to have that done in advance, because otherwise you really get backed into a corner with not being able to get things done.
Absolutely. And I've talked about this on my channel before, but I did a similar thing. Like once my dad was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, we really moved forward on getting my parents' wills updated. And it was great. My mom was able to put me as her power of attorney because, of course, my dad was starting to be forgetful and we didn't know how much longer he was going to be considered competent by lawyers.
Right.
So yeah, absolutely. And I feel like this could be a little bit overwhelming for daughters right now, Teresa, because we're like dealing with so many other things. But I remember you and I were talking about how some elder law attorneys are doing virtual visits with families. And I think it
Yes.
would be a great time for that.
Mhm. Yes, I've done a little bit of research on this, and I believe different states have different rules about this. But of course, this is all coming to the surface right now with this COVID-19 and emergency measures that have to be put in place so people can take care of business. But yes, I do know some elder law attorneys do virtual visits. I do know some that are able to do virtual notaries. So, to what extent they can do documents, that's probably just an attorney by attorney, state by state thing. But I would definitely check and see if you have an attorney in your area that is doing these virtual documents. Or I know some, like, for example, they were already in estate planning mode before COVID-19 came, but they didn't get everything finished.
Mm-hmm.
So they've been able to finalize documents through this virtual notary process so that things can get in place even while people are in quarantine.
That is so excellent. Is there a time period that is required by the IRS that you don't get your refund? Like, let's say my parents didn't, for some reason, my dad had dementia. My parents didn't file their taxes last year. Is it still possible to get the refund?
There is a statute of limitations on that, and generally it's 3 years. There's a couple of caveats to that depending on some other things, but in general, you have 3 years from the due date of the tax return to file the return and get a refund that you're due. Otherwise, the refund is lost. Obviously, if you owe and it's been 5 years, they still want the money, but if you have a refund coming, that is unfortunately lost.
Yeah, that's important to know. And I think, again, if you're having a challenge trying to talk with your parents about this, that's something that they might not know about. I know I didn't know about it until I talked with Teresa. So I'm sure that, they're going to want their refund, especially to pay for their care, to spend the money however they want to, go on vacation, things like that. So
yes, and in some cases, depending on their personal financial situation, if you're catching up on returns, they may have a year where they owe 1 year and they had a refund, and so you can use that refund to offset taxes they owe in a subsequent year. So I just hate to see people leave money on the table.
absolutely. And can you talk about what an RMD is?
So when a person reaches the age of 70 and a half, they have to begin taking distributions out of their IRA and retirement accounts. There's a lot of rules about that. You can defer the first one till the next year. But in general, when you reach that required minimum distribution age, you have to begin taking distributions, and that's based on the fair market value of your account. And that is a factor of your life expectancy. So you have to take that distribution every year, and you get penalized by the IRS if you don't take that distribution every year. The CARES Act that was passed that had a lot of information about COVID-19 relief, within that CARES Act, there's also a provision that allows someone who is taking their required minimum distributions and have pension IRA accounts that they've taken RMDs out of, you can forego the RMD for 2020 without a penalty.
Yes. So again, it's like some other detail to remember that is required by the government. So it really emphasizes how important it is to just like encourage your parents to hire someone to help with all of these little details. And I think too, it's important to mention that, for anyone watching this video later than 2020, the required minimum distribution, as far as we know right now, is still going to be required moving
Right.
forward.
But one tool that we let our clients know about that some find very helpful is that you can actually designate a portion of your RMD or all of it to a charity of your choice. Since they have increased the standard deduction so high now, a lot of people are no longer getting the benefit of charitable deductions, but yet a lot of people still feel passionately about their places of worship, their local charities, and they want to continue giving. And so this provides an avenue to still give and get the tax benefit for it. So it has to happen at the financial institution level. You let them know that you want to designate X amount of your RMD to the charity, and they will take care of that distribution. So then you don't pay tax on the distribution. So you don't then double dip and get a charitable deduction, but it ends up being a wash. So you haven't paid tax on the distribution, but yet you've been able to give to your charity of choice as well. It's a tool that I find a lot of people aren't aware of, and it's very handy if you're someone that doesn't necessarily need the cash and still wants to be charitable.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important. I want to share just super quick our experience with required minimum distribution, my family, that, when my dad, even though my dad had luckily hired a tax accountant when he realized that it was harder for him to do the taxes, we were not told by the tax accountant, unfortunately, about the required minimum distribution. And so we got that penalty, and it was depending on, how much money you have in savings and IRA and things like that, it can be a pretty hefty amount.
Yeah, that if you find out after the year has already rolled by and maybe you're doing your taxes roll or helping your parents with their taxes, and then you discover, oh, we didn't take the RMD, you can report that, and there's a special form that you file, and you're basically asking for forgiveness so that you don't get hit with the highest penalty on that. So that is an option. So don't ignore it. Just own up to it and go ahead and take the RMD, and they can file that special form that goes along with that.
Yes, and that's what we ended up doing too. We were able to get help from the tax accountant and our financial advisor to create a note for the IRS, fill out that form, and we did get a little bit of forgiveness, but it was still kind of a high amount.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that your parents have been taking those out as well. And again, that's why it's really great if you can hire a tax accountant, because you'll be able to talk with them directly behind the scenes and just make sure that everything is the way it needs to be. So
And so I'll just add this, insert this, that's another benefit of having a tax accountant involved, because if you haven't been involved in helping your parents with the returns, a tax accountant CPA will look at the return and say, oh, let's see, last year you had these IRA pension distributions. Do you have those this year? And the daughter may say, I have no idea about that. So that may be where it reveals itself that there's an RMD requirement floating around out there that the daughter wasn't aware of.
and that's exactly what happened to my family. So we realized that my dad hadn't filed an RMD because neither my mom nor I knew what the heck that was, or that we had to do it. So we found out through our tax accountant. And again, we were able to get a little bit of forgiveness on that, but it just would have been great to have that information ahead of time, which is why Teresa and I are providing that for you now. Long distance daughters who feel like they have no time right now, especially with coronavirus and all the things that are happening in the country. It's just, everything is very overwhelming. And so what would be something to help them in this process?
Just encourage all the daughters out there that feel like they don't have time to reach out to someone that can help them before things get too behind, get too late. I have met with numerous daughters of parents that say, I just didn't want to deal with it. I just had so much on my plate. I just couldn't take care of that. I didn't know where to look. And give yourself permission to not be the one that has to do that. seek help from someone to relieve that stress from
Yeah.
you, so that things don't get behind, and let someone else take on that.
Yes, and you still have time. That's why we're doing the interview
Right.
now. So as we all know, the tax deadline has been delayed from April 15th this year to July 15th. And so
Correct.
that's why we are coming to you with this information to just double check that everything is where it needs to be. And hopefully this gives you a little bit of extra time to make sure that you and your family have peace of mind as far as this goes.
Yep. Happy to help out with any questions or concerns that your audience daughters have about this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Teresa. And just one more thing. So, we had some really great recommendations in this interview. What's the one takeaway point that you want to make sure daughters know from this interview?
I think the takeaway is that they should not bury their head in the sand. Just don't ignore things. You have enough on your plate, making sure your parents' needs are being met physically, emotionally, spiritually. Don't let business build up and ignore it. Just go ahead and get some help to take care of those things. That's one less thing you have to worry about.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, Teresa, thank you so much. And where
Thank
can our
you.
viewers find you?
They can find me. I'll just go ahead and give you our firm website is blandgarvey.com, and you can also reach me via phone. I can give you that. It's 972-301-9521. I'm happy to speak to any one of your daughter audience members that would like to call. I'm happy to chat with them about concerns, or if they have questions, I am happy to help.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Teresa.
you.
Really appreciate your help, especially during this time. Just we have so many stresses coming from all over, and then it's just like the tax deadline is hard enough for our, for our immediate family, let alone
Right.
we have to worry about our parents as well. So really appreciate your sharing your time with us today.
Thank you
And
for
I
having me.
will, for all my viewers, I will put the website for Bland Garvey down below in the description, and also the way to contact Teresa. And thank you all for joining me today for another great expert interview. And if you love what you saw today and it was really helpful, I would really appreciate if you subscribe to my channel. And I will see you next time. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for having me.